Good morning. This is Unusual Activity powered by Financial Juice. This is George Avedon.
And Milton Marmonitis.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to continue our show from yesterday and discussing what a trader needs to do to prepare oneself. We'll go over news. We'll go over our thoughts on what we hear our traders are doing, whether it's fund managers, money managers, portfolio managers, and what people are doing just to get ready. So there's certainly always a lot going on in the marketplace, overnights and so forth. So what we'd like to do is just to start out what happened yesterday and run right into this morning. So yes, as you recall, there was a risk off trade, if you will, um, in the equities and trade going into the treasuries. Uh, we did see a negative open. We did see a slight pop, slight increase in markets towards the 10 a.m. hour, but then we did see continued weakness into the afternoon. The Dow Jones finished down 0.68%, S&P 500 down 0.58%, and the Nasdaq down 42%. Before we get into the markets this morning, I just want to have Milt's thought on how the day went yesterday. Did we see a carry through in yesterday's if you will risk off type trade?
From what yesterday's trading activity, we had lots of risk off in a way regarding the trading action. We had the levels that we talked about early in the morning of the 1980s. It traded on that level, bounced off of it numerous times, traded in the range we discussed as well between 1980 and 1990. Eventually, late afternoon, we broke through that 1980 support level, and basically the last few minutes of the day, we collapsed down to about 1972s. Continued selling into the close and even after the close. But overnight in Asia, Europe, we had a somewhat of a bounce in Asia, even though many analysts and firms out there downgraded their GDP type data. Other than that, people thought to themselves, maybe this is a time to go the other way, put some risk on, and hopefully get some sort of a bounce. The key thing to note today is the fourth day that if we close down, will be the first time this entire year that we close down 4 days in a row. So many desks out there are saying that they don't want that to happen because a lot of them are those superstitious type of people that believe if that continues that we may have our correction in place. But like I said, day to day, this market has no memory, so we'll see what the action is today.
I think that's a great point, Milt. One of the things we'll discuss consistently throughout our programs is the importance of having an opinion, not just on the short term, but on the long term. Whether you're an intraday trader, a swing trader, or a longer term investor, if you will, keeping an eye on the long term is absolutely critical. So what we'd like to do, we'd like to just some geopolitical events coming through. Certainly, the continued airstrikes over Syria is having an effect, or at least effect on geopolitics, if you will. Obama is speaking today at the UN at 3 p.m. The airstrikes are having an implication over foreign policy. There's a lot of discussions out of Iran and Syria, Middle East. So, again, as we said yesterday, this is just the beginning. There's even, an article over the news basically saying the airstrikes, this is just the beginning. We'll see how things work out. So there's a lot of conversation around that. Just some interesting things, a little bit away from the Middle East. There were protests in Moscow with respect to Russia's actions in the Ukraine. Also, what is really interesting out of Russia is that, if you think about the sanctions that the U.S. and the West is putting on Russia, remember Russia has a very good relationship with the Chinese government. So I think that's an important point as well. Looking at the larger picture. So what we'd like to do, if taking a look at the futures this morning, um, we're up 4.25. In taking a look at the Treasury at 10-year at 2.538. Natural gas is just down slightly 0.007. And we'll take a look at the overnights as Milton mentioned before we get into some of the more macroeconomics. Asia was just Nikkei was just down 0.24%. Hang Seng was actually up 0.35. So a little bit of mix in Asia following the U.S. markets. In Europe, we're having Europe has actually increased since the morning. CAC has been up most of the day. DAX and FTSE turned up just in the later hour later morning coming into the markets. So going into on the macroeconomic news, we have the POMO at 0.95 to 1.15 billion. And remember, that's the permanent open market operations, and we'd like to discuss that just a touch, if you will, the importance of that. That's the Federal Reserve basically buying securities outright in order to add reserves available to the U.S. banking system. If we take a look at in the last several months, we've actually seen POMO on a daily basis. Would you say that?
In regards to the past few months, yes, considerable on a daily basis, but recently with them tapering every month, we have seen that the average this month has been maybe about 8 days so far this month. Moving forward, like we said, we have one more month in all reality of POMO, which is going to be in October, and then which everyone believes we should be ending that. So November will be our first month in years of not having POMO action to even think about or even discuss on a morning basis.
Great, thank you. And moving on, we're certainly expecting new home sales at 10 a.m. Again, a discussion we had with yesterday, the importance of the real estate market and its effect in the overall market. What's the consensus? How the general public views the real estate market, and certainly how the stock market views the real estate market. So we're expecting that at 10. And as we said before, you want to keep an eye on home builders. You want to keep an eye on the Home Depots, the Lowe's, various ETFs out there that track home builders and real estate. Perhaps even taking a look at the bank stocks as well. Remember, when new homes, it's a contract. So when a contract has been finalized to sell a particular home, what's the ramifications of that, right? The construction ramification, the mortgage application, whether the individual can borrow, whether the bank can lend. So that's all goes into the equation of understanding the real estate market. The petroleum reserves are at 10:30. Remember, that has an impact on oil prices and possibility of inflationary pressures. That is heavily watched by industry insiders, institutionals, and so forth. And I think that's imperative to take a look at. Let's talk a little bit about the petroleum reserves and the importance of that. Your thoughts on how oil traders how they see this particular report? The way I see it is they look at it from a perspective of where the reserves are, right, and where possible price movements are in the future.
When it comes to a trader's mentality on the oil number, in my opinion, they only look at certain things. They look at the build, or they look at if it was a takeaway regarding the action that will that will occur on any equity in that industry. So the key thing I always do as a trader is look at a list of names that could be affected by the oil numbers. Wait till the oil numbers come out, digest the news, and then base my trades on the initial movements regarding oil on the markets. It's a very difficult trade, but it's something that a lot of people look at, a lot of people do. It's something that takes some time to really get a good footing on, but after a certain amount of time of digesting news and taking certain equities to that news, you get a good feel on what the reactions are usually going to be on equity side by looking at the oil numbers.
That's a great point, Milt. So in the theme that we've been discussing is looking at the actual number, really thinking about what the implication on other securities, other commodities, other energy, and the impact on both from a short-term and a longer-term perspective. Moving on, there are a few Fed speakers that we're looking at. We're looking at Loretta Mester at 12:05 and Charles Evans at 1 p.m. There was some rumbling this morning with respect to how Yellen is warning complacency in the conversation of considerable time. So I think that will continue to be discussed, and we'll see how the market reacts to that.
Yeah, George, also regarding that considerable time comment, there was a article that's been going around many desks this morning in Bloomberg stating that people are becoming too compliant on those two words. The considerable time is a quote in a way that many have thought to themselves, this is something that's going to take lots of time into next year, late next year, because they do not want to shock the markets with a rate hike or do something that will, drop this quote-unquote frothy market that people are discussing. But the key thing to note is that considerable time quote does not mean that we are looking down late next year or early next year. Keep in mind, specifically, if you listen to all the Fed speak in the past few weeks, they constantly mention the fact that they will raise or do whatever is needed depending on data. So if you see strong data, you can see an earlier action. If you see weaker data, maybe you'll see some action down the road. But keep in mind that considerable time is not a timestamp on when exactly it's going to happen.
I think that's a great point, Milt. There's a lot of conversation about what will influence the Fed, what will influence that considerable time to be changed. We're a society, I think, that we've so addicted to, if you will, specific terminology and interpretation and so forth. I think as we talk about, as people that we speak to have an opinion on this, is really have a longer term view on what the Fed may do should we see economic figures that are a little bit more indicative, excuse me, of a stronger economy. So I think that's really important. Moving on, we did see overnight German business confidence dropping to 104.7 from 106.3. This is for the fifth month in a row. And again, this is on the more slightly away from the U.S. markets, but again, we discussed yesterday, Chinese comfortable with the slower growth rate. We've seen consistent persistent weakness out of weak data out of the European economy. So that's something to take a look at. We also put in Baltic Dry Index falls. That's something that is really interesting to take a look at, and this is the index that tracks how much raw material is being shipped via the sea, whether it's iron ore and various other things. So I think that's kind of an interesting index to take a look at. Again, as a trader, you want to take a look at everything possible and put as much color on to your own trading as much as humanly possible. So moving on, we can let's see. We discussed overnight markets again. Europe seems to have bounced back from the earlier morning sessions, so we'll see how things progress. Um, Crude oil currently at just zero point zero 0.07 cents up at 91.62, so we'll correct that. Distillates, gasoline at 2.6235, down 0.0052. Natural gas at up 0.004 cents. Heating oil was 2.6727. Gold 1223, up $1. What's interesting, what we detected earlier this morning, silver was down about 0.5%, and it was lower across all currencies. We included the COMEX, but it was interesting to see that silver was down in most currencies. The 10-year yield, we're looking at 2.53. Again, within that 2.5, 2.4, 2.6 range. So I think that's interesting. One thing that's picked up this morning, there was a slight steepening of the yield curve versus the 1 month ago. So we'll see how, as we move out to the longer maturity. So we'll see how that works out. We'd like to now get into, as we discussed yesterday, the importance of understanding insider purchases. So we'd like to run through some of the insider purchases that we detected this morning. WSO director bought 3,000 shares at $88.14. RVLT, the CEO, bought 100,000 shares at $1.67. INTX, 10% owner, bought 55,396 shares at $3.89. DAKP, director bought 25,000 at 2.43. ULTA chief HR officer by $2,700, $120.17. FULL, a CEO bought just over 11,000 at $6.24, and SQBG director 10,000 at $13.71. Again, we like to discuss these because it's important to know, not just as if you're holding security in your particular portfolio, not just if you're a swing trader or a short-term trader. It's important to note what are the insiders doing. Not from an insider information perspective, of course, everything's compliant, but it's important. This is money that the directors, the CEO, and so forth are spending of their own money and purchasing these particular securities. So that's an interesting thing. If we take a look at where these stocks are in the pre-market, we take a look at WSO. Not much movement yet. RVLT, just slight movement there. INTX. Bear with us just one moment. Give a slight. Okay, so not much activity there, but we'll see that came through overnight. We'll see how the market interprets that. Typically, also what we see when there's an insider purchase intraday within the trading day, we do see a greater inflection on movement when we see a CEO um, or director uh, purchase these particular shares, especially if it's a larger block of shares as during the trader day. So I think that's really important. Just gonna check on quickly, see if we have any other movements here on these other securities, and we'll move on. So here, ULTA, FULL. We'll take a quick peek here. Okay, not much movement yet. SQBG. Let's see what, again, not much movement here. We saw a lot of these overnights. That's not uncommon. Again, once we, once you see these insider purchases come through intraday, I think we typically, what we found was we typically see a greater impact, not just on volume, but also price as well, clearly. So sometimes you'll see if a director purchases, you'll see a huge stick up in terms of the charts. If you're looking at candles, for example, um, so and a stick up in volume where it's detected not just by folks that watch insider purchases, but also technicians and so forth. So I think it's a really good thing. We feel that's a really important thing to watch for in not just in pre-market, but also in the upgrade downgrades. So when we take a look at in the upgrades downgrades, again, when we discussed yesterday um, the importance of understanding upgrades and downgrades is when we take a look at upgrades and downgrades. Uh, is the analyst new to the game? Meaning, is it something new? Did this analyst visit the factory, visit the biotech, visit the organization that to determine whether it's an upgrade or a downgrade, right? So there has to be a catalyst behind this particular downgrade. So we're going to run through. There's quite a few of them. We'll pick out a few here and mention them. So bear with me as we run through the list here. FCN, which is FTI Consulting, is raised to outperform at William Blair. Gold Corp GG has been raised to outperform versus neutral at Credit Suisse. Uh, High Crush Partners HCLP raised to buy from versus hold at Wunderlich. Marvel, MRVL, has been raised to market perform versus market underperform at JMP Securities. Rio Tinto, as you know, is widely followed. RTP has been raised to overweight at versus equal weight at Morgan Stanley. Bear with us one moment here. Okay. Um, let's see. Sage Therapeutic raised to buy versus neutral at Goldman Sachs. Okay. So we are seeing if you see this here, so clearly there are some names that have a greater inflection on overweights, excuse me, greater inflection on upgrades, downgrades and stuff. So we see in pre-market, we see here at $30.61. $30.28. Sorry. And Cymex SNX raised to outperform at Raymond James SNX. And we see that at $59.75. So we'll run through the downgrades as well. And those are important as well. So you'll see sometimes you see sometimes a greater inflection during the trade day. Again, this is pre-market as everybody's getting ready for the trading day. They're beginning to structure their portfolios based on the upgrades and downgrades. So you will see a some moves in the market. We'll see how the during the trading day how things work out. Running through the downgrades, we see Ascena Retail at ASNA, cut to neutral versus buy at Goldman Sachs. Auxilium Pharmaceuticals, AUXL, cut to sector perform at, bear with us, AUXL. Cut to sector perform at RBC Capital. Eric, Erickson, excuse me, uh, cut to neutral versus buy UBS. So what we want to see here is how also not just which analyst is doing the upgrade versus downgrade. Um, Really, what's the inflection on the stock and also the competitors? So I think that's really important to know. Um, so moving on, MDVN cut to neutral versus buy at Goldman Sachs. Morgan Stanley cut to neutral versus overweight at JP Morgan. I always find it interesting when uh, analysts rate each other. So I think that's just one of those situations. Pan American Silver PAAS cut to hold versus buy at TD Securities. Scorpio Tankers STNG cut to neutral versus buy at Swedbank. Trimas TRS, you see this already down. See here, down. Cut to market perform versus perform at Wells Fargo. Unilever, UL. Cut to underperform versus hold at Jeffrey again. So this should paint an interesting picture for the market. So bear with us as we move on to a few things that was interesting today, and then we'll move on to some of the filings after some of the more uh, interesting news here. RITT, it's up in pre-market yesterday. Remember, a couple of days ago, reported that Israel launches cyber defense authority, so that's getting a bit of a kick up. Apple, just some rumblings. I'm sure you folks have been hearing this. Several traders passing around Gizmodo article last night. Basically, if left in a pocket, iPhone 6 tends to iPhone 6 Plus tends to bend. So they think that's interesting. Taking a look at Apple this morning. Um, Again, we'll see what happens during the trading day. I always take those news with a grain of salt. So um, let's run through some of the filings in Heyman Capital's Kyle Bass real stake in Argentina, YPF, um, joining other notables like George Soros and Dan Loeb. We talked about the filing, the importance of excuse me, wrong symbol. We talk about the importance of filing. So we do see, even in the morning, we do see a stick up in the YPF. I think that's really important. We discussed the importance of really understanding what institutional, more larger investors really think about particular securities, and it's really important to understand that we're in an era of activist investors. We're in the era of large, whether it's hedge funds, investors accumulating shares to have a say on where the company is going, direction of the company, and so forth. So I think that's really interesting. Something else I'm going to put this in IDSY. Bear with me. Let me just pop this in. IDSY, we do see a 13G filing from Osmium Partners on ID Systems. They show a 5.4 stake. Now remember, the SEC files has various information with respect to their filing. So I think that's interesting to note. And let me just pop this in so you folks can see. And this is IDSY. So again, the SEC does have various filings with respect to whether it's Form 4. Form 4 has information on insider trading, insider transactions, excuse me, selling and so forth, accumulations of options. So there's a lot of information on a lot of these SEC forms, and we track those on a daily and intraday basis. So I think that's really important to keep an eye on. A few other interesting tidbits before we get into let's see a few let's see, bear with us one moment. So INVO just coming through here. INO that Inovio Pharmaceutical announces Ebola vaccine moving into human trial. So again, this is on the heels of TKMR, HEB conversations. We saw yesterday that WHO was a bit, was very concerned. There's a U.S. Report showing that worst case scenario is 1.4 million um, in, affected, if you will, by the Ebola virus. So again, I think the World Health Organization is taking this seriously. I think governments are taking it seriously. So I think we'll continue to see information coming out of various governments with respect to their actions on Ebola. Remember, this could actually affect global trade. Um, so I think we really have to take a look on that. What's your feel on that? I know governments are concerned about Ebola. There's a lot of conversation. Yesterday was TKMR. Um, I know it's just an unravel. It's a story that's in the beginning. But what's your opinion on that?
George, regarding Ebola, you have to keep in mind that in my opinion, every little biotech out there now is going to start coming out with PR about they have this Ebola cure, they have that Ebola cure. They're starting processes for um, Ebola this, Ebola that, but you have to be very careful because in all reality, no, there is no real cure for Ebola. It's a vaccine that people that are trying to create vaccines that have the possibility of this or that, which could take years for them to produce. So many companies, especially these small cap little biotechs, will come out with a PR discussing the fact that they are working on an Ebola vaccine. They are doing this, they're doing that to see some activity in their stock. So that's something to be wary on regarding anytime you see comments regarding Ebola in a PR from a small biotech. Case in point, HEB came out with one the other day, which propped the stock up about 7-8 cents. The stock took that news, popped it to about 36, 37 cents, and then it's all the way back to 30 cents 5 or 6 days later. So it's always smart to keep in mind that many of these small names will do what they can, especially on a quote unquote hot topic, to pump some PR out there to get interest for their company, to see their price rise. And in my opinion, eventually they're going to do a secondary on that news. So keep it in mind. Don't go crazy on them. The key ones that are always being played, which have been in the news lately with positive movements in Ebola, is TKMR. Anytime you hear any Ebola news or WHO comes out with their statistics, the key stock to watch is TKMR. Very active, volume comes in, and you see immediate effect in that area.
I think that's a great point, Mel. The one of the things to keep in mind is remember there's 30 the reason that there's 30% survival rate, just a minor medical thing is there 30% of the population, their immune system is able to combat Ebola. The rest of the population, that's where the medication comes in. So just put that in your in your thoughts, and as you're approaching these particular stocks. I think that's a great point. And also remember, there's a lot of headline news. Correct, Milt? There's a lot of conversation of what's going to happen. Should it happen? Who's uh, Can this medication be used? So I think that's also important to note when we're looking at these particular securities.
Agree 100%. There is, every other day we come out with statistics and people think to themselves, this could be the end of the world, blah blah. In all reality, though, when you sit back and evaluate the whole situation, nothing really matters until you have something in the U.S. or something in Asia. But if it's contained for now, keep in mind that if anything does happen, the key name to watch in this sector would be TKMR, which would be a huge play off of anything of a widespread type problem starting to happen. But it's something where you have these statistics always out every other day with numbers that are reaching in the millions now, 1.4 million they said yesterday. So it's something to keep an eye out because the stocks are in play. So you can catch yourself a 1, 2, 3 day move and evaluate.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point, Milt. So again, one of our central themes is taking a look at the information, understanding quickly assess whether or not you want to be in a particular trade, and also how whether or not if you have it in your portfolio, how would you position the portfolio, this particular security in your portfolio, not just in a single day, but really over the next week or over the next few weeks to months? Should any news, any headline news affect a particular security? So I think that's really important to know. Going back to the filings, I have it up here. Bear with us one moment. So a few more filings that just came through. HZNP. I'm going to do my best to pronounce this name. It's Venkataraman. 15.6% stake. LEI Kondagua 12.998% stake. HMGC Ronald Berkeley 26.8% stake. RSG Cascade building up to 29.8% stake. One of the things, let's take a quick peek on these stock HCMP. Maybe we'll see maybe a little bit of an increase in the morning. LEI, not much yet. MHGC, taking a look at here while it's still waiting, so not much yet on that. Again, but sometimes we do see a greater impact once the market opens. And one of the things that we want to talk about is when these stakes actually get a little bit higher than a 5 or 10% share. Do you think there could be other activity with such higher stakes? What's your take on that?
Well, we all know when a certain amount of stake is being broken that the interest is more into a collaboration with the company or even possibly taking outs or mergers. So once you see a 10% threshold being broken, that is something where you have to sit back, do your due diligence, and figure out if the company, why or what the reason behind them building such a large stake in the company is. As you can see, you had Horizon this morning. The guys, if I can, Venkataraman had a 15.6 stake. The question is, why would he buy such a large position in a company like this? Either there has to be a reason behind it, or he wants to make a change in the company. So when you look at that and you look at the size of the stake, always keep in mind that these people who buy these amounts, they do it for a reason, and the reason usually is to make changes or to go out and say, you know what, I think it's time for you guys to either merge or take out or be taken out by another company.
Absolutely, and that's a great point. One of the things that I take a look at is will there be in addition to the a change to the board of directors right after this particular stake? Will there be other news following this particular stake? And what's the ramifications on the particular securities? Not just in the immediate. In the immediate, you'll have your intraday traders, your swing traders taking on positions, and eventually you'll have an impact. You'll have some news, you'll have some um, uh, conversations within various news organizations on the possible implications of this particular stake. So one of the things we want to move on here is, let's see here, just a few other news. We went over some of the filings in ICLD just coming through within the last few minutes here. Bear with us. We'll pop this in. ICLD. ICLD Intercloud announces over 26.4 million in new business backlog. Also, some CNBC chatter. David Faber says activists and Salix in early stage discussions regarding potential deal. Um, Also, RNN gets FDA foreign designation, or excuse me, let's try that again. RNN gets FDA orphan designation for pancreatic cancer treatment. Remember, orphan designation by the FDA means that a company is working on a particular drug that affects a small population. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see. We see already in the morning a little bit of a pop there. We see at just about what would you say, about 84 cents on that RNN. But again, these biotechs are always in play, right? They're always um, traders are very interested in them. It could be, as Milt always says, it could be an opportunity for a quick play. Let's talk about that a little bit. During the trading day, Milt, we always look out for news such as this, right? How does a trader approach perhaps a headline like this during the trading day?
Well, through my years of experience on trading news related headlines, it seems that nowadays you'll never be able to beat the algos out there, the computers. When a headline hits, these computers scour for individual words inside those headlines, and it becomes an automatic purchase. So the best thing to do is always read the news, look at the impact it had already on the equity on the stock, and think to yourself, is it that noteworthy? Certain biotechs come out with headlines regarding orphan designations, FDA comments, FDA approvals, FDA, they negativity. They have black labels. There's so much when it comes to biotechs where it's very difficult to really understand the impact it will have on the stock. Usually, when it's a large impact, they will usually halt the stock prior to a FDA decision being made. That really is the most market moving for those kinds of stocks. If you have a positive FDA approval or a negative approval, if they label it differently, if they label it with the word blacklist or black this, it's very difficult to get a complete understanding of what a biotech really has to offer when it comes to an approval or an orphan designation on that equity. If you do not understand biotechs, I recommend it's always good to do a little work prior to putting some money into affecting that stock. Clearly, I'm sure everyone has seen numerous times when they wake up in the morning and biotechs are either up 60% or down 75%. It's a risk where not much is known until an actual approval or denial is out there. So it's a tough one to play. I always recommend you do due diligence when it comes to a news-worthy headline on biotech, but the most action that I've seen lately have been in that area.
And that's a great point. I think Milton hit on something that's really important. Is not just, we always talk about doing due diligence and putting your own subjectivity on a particular stock, on a particular trade, but really do the fundamental research. Do the research that's um, understand who are there any institutional holders in a particular security that would prompt a really large really prompt a large sell-off or a large spike in a particular security. Would you agree with that, Milt? In terms of the larger institutional holders, larger holders, how they can actually affect the volatility of the particular security.
It always comes down to that, George. Also, another one that I always keep a close eye on is the size of their float. Usually, some of these small biotechs, even though they do so many secondaries to the larger floats, usually 80% of those floats are minimal. They have the ability to be propped and moved by, in all reality, any individual trader out there. So it's always good to, like I said, when it comes to those types of names, it's always good to do your work. Don't just join the herd. Do your work, think about it, and then put some money into action. But especially you have to be very careful on the low float names and the names like George said, the ones that can be manipulated by the large hedge funds or funds out there that could prop a stock up or down. So always do your work. If I can tell you anything, is due diligence is key in this business, especially nowadays.
Absolutely. Thanks, Milt. So we're just going to have a quick recap of where the futures are. Lower than before. We got futures up 2.5 at 1974.75. The 10-year at 2.535. Crude oil up zero point zero 0.07 cents. So, what do you think? I mean, you think it's going to be a relatively, would you say it's a relatively quiet session? What do
Well,
you think?
right off the bat, George, I can tell you it's very quiet. We have a lot of key levels to look at, regarding the ES futures. Keep in mind that number 1968. That number, that level in the ES futures has been our recent low in the past 2 months. If you put up a chart on the LES, you can see somewhat of a rounding top being formed. Currently, we are at support. We broke the 1980 support yesterday, and that now becomes resistance. So the 1980 number is our resistance. The key number to the downside that needs to be held is around 1968. If that number is broken with a volume burst, I believe the next level of support could be in the 1950s, 1947, 1950 level. Keep those two numbers in mind. I think the market is at a tipping point right now. They're going to try and do whatever they can to keep it positive. They do not want that number to be broken, and victory for the Bulls today will be a close above the 1980 level in the ES futures.
Thanks, Milt. So, and also just to keep in mind, in the U.S., tomorrow is a 2-day Rosh Hashanah holiday. So I think we may see in the afternoon a slightly subdued, slightly lower volume, wouldn't you say? And then the next 2 days, I would say slightly lower volume in the markets.
I agree 100%. Clearly, it's a thing every year where this time of the month we have a large decrease in volume, which could be something to keep an eye on as well, because it's very easy to manipulate a market where there's no volume, as we can see during the summer times.
Absolutely.
So, good point, George. That's also very key to keep a very close eye on.
Perfect. So, a couple of things, and we'll go into just some of the other scheduling for the rest of the day. Something came out of CYNO. They received an FDA clearance to market Pico Sure. So again, as we talked about, biotechs will just continue to be a concentration of the market. I see them as always a darling to trade because they're active. You certainly have to watch yourself, but traders love to trade, to be involved in the biotechs and more volatile names. And I think that's, again, get used to hearing these names, get used to understanding what news means from an FDA perspective, as Milton said. What are the headline news and how to interpret that? So I think that's really important. A couple of things. 1 o'clock is going to be, in addition to the Fed speaking, we'll see the results of the 35 billion 5-year note auction. Now, again, we've had quantitative easing. We discussed the POMO. Um, Remember, there's a lot of governments, a lot of pension funds. There's a lot of involvement in the Treasury. So I think just looking at headline news in terms of Treasury specifically, I think you really have to look at the greater picture when you look at yields. Wouldn't you say, Milt? I think that's would be good due diligence on the part of traders.
Like I always say, George, I think the number one thing, especially for an individual trader these days, is always do your work. There's never any shortcut in this business. If you hear people out there doing this, doing that, making hundreds of thousands of, don't listen. Sit back, evaluate your situation, do your work, do your due diligence,
Absolutely.
and put money to work. That's all the advice we can give. It's not an easy game out there, especially nowadays with a lot of we have a lot of interaction by the feds of every single country in a way, from Abe in Japan to you got Yellen in the U.S. to Draghi in Europe. It's very difficult, but in the end, if you do your work and you do your due diligence, I'm sure that everything will be hopefully a profitable trade.
Absolutely. So as we're beginning to get ready for the open here in just a few moments, about a little under 9 minutes or so. So we'll run through the numbers again. Let's see here. We discussed the importance of insider purchases. One of the things, again, keep an eye during the day for insider purchases. Also, we'll be introducing within the next few days a conversation around equity derivatives options and their importance within within the markets, understanding how to trade based on that information, and also how to understand. There's a lot of information with respect to social media. Um, so let's, insider purchases are important. We'll begin to, over the next few days, discuss options and their importance, more, also from the macro perspective and more individual securities. Uh, so let's run through a bit again. Once we had a little bit of a tick up in the futures, up now 3.75. We see Europe for the most part still positive. DAX is up 0.07. We'll call it borderline flat. Um, the CAC is up at just a little bit over 0.5%. The FTSE, let's call that flat, up 0.02. So again, we'll see how that carries over into the U.S. markets. We we thank you for joining us today. We look forward to tomorrow morning as we bring you more information. And as always, we'd like to encourage feedback and continue to join us. Um, and just a last check of futures here, 3.75 as we just go into the last 5 minutes of the pre-market. Uh, Oil up 11 cents. And see, gasoline down 0.0092. And so we wish you happy hunting. We thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in the morning. Thank you. And this has been Unusual Activity, powered by Financial Juice, with George Avedon and Milton Marmonides. Thank you, and happy hunting.